So I'm really excited about our next panel. While nonprofits are on the front lines of driving change on the most pressing social issues of our time, corporations are thinking about how to best leverage their brand capital to affect change. Research shows that consumers are looking for engagement from corporations beyond just lip service. So this is going to be a fireside chat that will talk about research and insights from three great leaders. So let me introduce them to you all. Vanessa Wakeman is founder and CEO of the Wakeman Agency. She's also a member of our IPR Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She has a deep knowledge about the politics of social change and mastery at advancing the efforts of mission-driven causes. And she is a trusted advisor to nonprofit organizations and socially responsible companies. Vanessa has also been a great friend to IPR, and we're going to do some collaboration with her and her agency. Kassandra Frederique is the executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. It's a national nonprofit to help end the war on drugs, which has disproportionately harmed Black, Latinx, Indigenous, immigrant, and LGBTQ+ communities, and build alternatives grounded in science, compassion, health, and human rights. Welcome, Kassandra. Happy to have you here. And then last but not least is Dr. Sekou Siby. He's the CEO and president of Restaurant Opportunity Centers United, where he leads the national staff to support membership operations, training and education programs, community and public engagement, as well as policy advocacy and organizational development. Under his leadership, ROC United is building worker power and promoting policies that improve the lives of restaurant workers in their communities. So I'll turn it over to you, Vanessa. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, thank you. I am excited to have this conversation with these two brilliant leaders. So the topic of our conversation is the new social justice playbook. And social justice has gone mainstream, and I think that warrants a new way of doing things. So when we think about it, many generations ago, government was the primary entity that was responsible for social issues. And then they started to collaborate with nonprofits. And so it was nonprofits and government that were doing that. Now today, nonprofits bear the sort of primary responsibility for social change and social justice. Then recently, we've seen sort of a shift where now corporations, I believe it was last August or September, when the Business Roundtable, the membership organization of CEOs, they made a statement that their purpose, the purpose of a corporation, exists to support the communities in which they work. And that was a business priority for them. And they had never said that. They had consistently been focused on like shareholder value. So we're seeing a bit of a change there. And then fast forward to this May, companies shared their social and racial justice commitments on social media after the murder of George Floyd. And many of them were accused of being performative and sort of just, sort of making these comments in the moment. And while that can be argued, I don't think that at this point, corporations have any choice but to sort of engage. And maybe we're working toward a model of more interdependence between corporations and government and nonprofits. And what I wanted to sort of think through today and look at some of the data points about is like, what are consumers thinking about, and where is the opportunity for engagement and communicating social justice in a way that sort of resonates with audiences and catalyzes people to take action. So the social media company Sprout Social, they conducted a survey of about 1,500 consumers, and it said that 70% of the consumers are looking for brands to take a stand on social issues. And if we look back several years ago, that probably wouldn't have been the case. And corporations were probably comfortable sort of staying in the background. But I know that Siby's organization and Kassandra's organizations have both been incredibly effective in sort of engaging different audiences and communicating social justice priorities in a way that really sort of resonate with people and get them to take action and sort of be engaged in the fight for these causes. So I'd love to sort of hear from both of you around what sort of like, what's been your magic and your secret sauce, but what advice would you give to any corporations that are thinking about how to engage with audiences and who want to sort of take up, be champions of particular social justice or racial justice issues? Siby, you want to start?
Yeah, I think we talked to our members. We also conducted some research. What we have to say to corporations, our narrative shift is based on workers' voices and the stories from workers. And that's critical. And I want to give an example here. Back in 2010, we conducted a study to show why health and safety was paid sick day was important for restaurant workers. The reason being, we've seen it back in 2010 as a public health issue. And the stories from the workers were one of this one, right? You have workers who have flu. And this worker has to go through the subway station, go to work, contaminate people in the subway stations, contaminate people at the work, contaminate back. And that has a price to pay from the consumers in general, the government in particular, and the employer who has more people sick now. So the way we look at it is providing sick day to workers, for example, is not something that you're doing just because you want to do it for workers. It is a public health issue to provide sick day to workers. So our perspective has always been, and it is, that supporting workers is beneficial to employers. It is beneficial to a community at large. Another example that we want to give is we have seen women with sick children because they couldn't afford not to go to work and they have to stay home or stay home with the children. They couldn't do that. They have to let sick children go to work because they didn't have sick day. So our understanding now is that it is good news that corporate social responsibility has been something that's making inroad, because no longer corporations are thinking of the business bottom line or the shareholders. They're looking at the community at large more so as the stakeholder they need to take care of. And that has been important. So we have been promoting that through workers' voices, but also involving a group of business owners that we call raise employers, and making sure that they understand the impact of their behavior on the communities. So this is what we have done, but we don't think that making a statement is enough. We've seen a lot of organizations making statements. Statement is not enough. The change needs to be embedded in the organization's value system and core strategy in order to make it function. For example, organizations who don't have inclusion, racial diversity cannot make a statement. They need to reflect the structure, need to reflect the racial and the gender and all the equity that they're talking about. So it is important, it is going in the right direction, but it is simply not enough.
Thank you, thank you. Kassandra, what about you?
I think what's super crucial here, and I really appreciate your framing, Vanessa, is that we're operating under this idea that what is happening right now is actually what should be happening. So that this interdependence between corporations, philanthropy, nonprofits, and government is actually the best case scenario. And what I would offer is that that's a problem. Like corporations, philanthropy, and nonprofits are taking up the responsibility of the government, which has abdicated its responsibility to build healthy and thriving communities. And so I find that I think what's really important, as an organization whose advocacy actually created this space for industry and corporations to exist. So when I say that really explicitly, Drug Policy Alliance is one of the organizations that has created the opportunity for marijuana corporations to exist. We work to legalize cannabis because we wanted to end criminalization associated with that substance. And in the sphere of creating regulation, we created the space for industry. And what we found very quickly was that the industry was not actually aligned with the advocacy that created the space for them to exist. And so this conversation around the new social justice norm is particularly crucial for us because our advocacy has created the space for industry to exist, and that industry does not feel the same level of responsibility to the people that created the opportunity for them to make money. And what I mean by that is that corporation has created policies to ban the kinds of people that were criminalized for cannabis to not be a part of the marketplace that has now been created. And then we have a situation where George Floyd is murdered, and then those same corporations say Black Lives Matter, but their actions at the federal level, their actions at the state legislature actually denote that Black lives do not matter because they don't want them to be a part of the industry. And so when we're having the conversation of the new social justice perspective and agenda, I think what's really crucial for corporations to understand is that it's that these corporations have to do more than statements. We know this. They have to do more than hiring. We know this. But if they actually do care about communities, that they need to support groups that are doing the work to make those communities whole. How are they creating employee programs where employees can donate to nonprofits and the organizations match it? How do those corporations actually lend their name and resources to the advocacy campaigns that Sekou is fighting for on worker protections and family paid leave, right? So the same corporations that are saying we care about communities are the same corporations that have punitive and draconian policies that make it impossible for those moms to take time off because they have a sick kid. You can't have it both ways. And so I think what's clear is that the expectation of corporations is don't put out a shiny image. It's change your internal policies and provide resources to communities that are pushing the policies that are actually going to make our companies well, because corporations can say that, you know, we don't just care about our shareholders, we care about communities. But if they are pushing policies that actually destabilize those same communities, then it's not just performative, it's dangerous.
Thank you, thank you. So I want to shift to another stat. So Porter Novelli published a social justice report earlier this year. And one of the things that stood out was it talked about what consumers want to see from companies. So they said that, let me read the stat. The survey showed that 74% of participants believe that while a company can have one issue it stands for, that doesn't mean that the company can ignore other important issues. And so I think this is really relevant because both of your organizations have like masterfully sort of adjusted from your core issue to include other things that were important and relevant. And so, and I think about Rock United, Siby, you all are a restaurant advocacy organization at your core, but one of the things that you all have done, you know, in the age of Me Too, you really sort of elevated the sort of conversation about sexual harassment. You have done a lot around racial discrimination and gender discrimination, with most of the workforce of restaurants being women. And Kassandra, while you are a sort of like a policy organization, you all have definitely stepped into the ring around racial justice and social justice in like really specific and strategic ways to sort of show how these policies disproportionately hit some of the very sort of demographics that you're advocating for. And so I'd like to sort of understand from both of you, how are you able to sort of communicate like you're still focused on your primary issues, sort of like the core mission of the organization, while still being able to expand and include these other things to show that there's a connection? Like racial justice does not just sort of sit in one bucket, but all of these things are sort of all related. How are you able to communicate that and to sort of educate and bring awareness to your audiences, and then sort of get them to sort of be aligned with sort of like the vision for your organization and your work?
Yeah, I think the way that Rock did it is first of all, by listening to our members through the narrative, the focus on narrative, but also by conducting research. One of the things that we did in conducting research is it is called match pair testing. In a match pair testing scenario, what we did is send people of color and white male to apply for high-paying job in a restaurant. So the result of this match pair testing has shown that white men were hired at a higher rate than people of color, right? So you have white men were also hired at a higher rate than women. So what it shows is that people of color and women lack equal access to paying jobs. So even if our focus was primarily in economic justice, right, building a ladder has been a problem from people of color and women to get equal access to higher paying jobs. So you can't just fight for good jobs. you also need to fight for access to good jobs. So for us, it is important, but bigger problem that we see is that the corporations who are doing that don't reflect the constituency that they are not hiring. So we want to make sure that corporations are also reflecting the diversity of the people that they are not hiring, because the people who are there don't understand even that they discriminate. Many of them don't understand that they're discriminated because they don't come from those communities. They don't come from areas where our people have been living. So not only that we need to fight for economic justice, but we have to make sure that access to good jobs are also available, equal access to good jobs are also available to women and people of color. So that was predominantly something that we have seen in our research. Another element has been that we look at data from states where tip minimum wage has been eliminated, and we realize that there are more sexual harassment in places where women tend to live on tips than where they are paid $2.13, and in places like California or Oregon or Nevada where this has been eliminated. There is a full minimum wage for everybody, tip on top. So $15 is the minimum wage for all. So you don't have a reduction of your salary because you're earning tips. Tips are coming on top. So the very fact that young high school students are going to a restaurant, becoming a server, and living on $2.13 let them be subject to sexual harassment, which is something that we all condemn, but because of the economic injustice made to them, we couldn't do anything about it. So we believe that eliminating, the tip credit will bring salaries up, and a woman who can work and get paid decently do not need to let themselves be subject of sexual harassment without any reaction. So these are areas that we have been forceful and talking to our members. A lot of women, stories are out there to show how it has impacted our communities of color and women in particular.
Thank you.
And what I would offer is that, Audre Lorde has said multiple times that there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And so it absolutely, we are not outside of our issue area by talking about racial justice or talking about Me Too. We are in our issue area. And I think that's what corporations miss, is that your customers are the people that are buying, Johnson & Johnson baby powder are also dealing with maternal health. They're also dealing with healthcare. If you have a baby, if you are a baby product company, then you need to figure out what are the issues that are impeding people from getting pregnant. What are the issues of rearing children? Those things are all a part of your customer base. It's not just about the product that you're putting forward. And so for me, when we can't work on drug policy without talking about race, because drug laws were proliferated because they wanted to create social control mechanisms to control groups of people. All drug laws were created based on controlling a group of people. Opium laws were for Asian migrants. Marijuana laws were for Mexicans. Cocaine, crack, heroin for Black people. And so if we're going to talk about drugs, we have to talk about race, because the reason we're talking about drugs is because of race, right? And if, for Sekou, in talking about the restaurant stuff, it's not just the fact that people are in restaurants. Restaurants are places of rampant sexual harassment, rampant economic instability, rampant drug use. Like, all these things are happening in these issues. And so just because we focus on single issue advocacy, it is a prism in which we can look at multiple issues that are affecting our issue area. And I think that intersectionality and that interdependence is necessary for us to actually build a world where communities can thrive. Because if I get rid of all the drug laws and the drug war ends tomorrow, but that same person is then accosted on the street and killed because they also have mental health, then I actually haven't saved anyone's life. I've only delayed their death. And that's how advocates are thinking about it. And so I don't necessarily think corporations need to think about it in that way, but corporations actually need to create more nuance and texture around their customer profile and understand that if they need customers, their customers need to be alive. And what are the things that are keeping them from being thriving people?
So I want to add a question about the pandemic and what's changed, if anything, in the way that you communicate? Is there any sort of trends or sort of predictions or any changes that you've thought about because of the pandemic? Are you communicating with your audiences more frequently? Is it a different type of communication? I know that in some of my conversations with clients and with some of you, with you all, thinking about like, what is the right tone? Are we sort of, trying to tap into people's fear and uncertainty, trying to make them feel comfortable? Are there certain sort of threads that you're finding, trying to weave together in your communications? And just going back to that Porter Novelli report, it mentioned that 83% of the people who were surveyed said a company doesn't have to be perfect when talking about social justice issues, but it should be open and honest. And so thinking about the way both of you communicate on behalf of your organizations, I always find it to be sort of like incredibly transparent and authentic, and just wondering like where has that sort of sustained or shifted in any way during the pandemic?
Yeah, for us, the communication strategy has been a bit more a digital communication during the pandemic, more so than having a physical meeting space or having more talk. Everything has been on digital communication. But something remains. It is critical that for us, a narrative shift needs to be done by the voices of workers because they are the one impacted. So we're using the tools of narrative shift to change the thinking about, how workers are treated, how people may not understand what is really going on. Aside from the, COVID-19, most people didn't know the relation between having sick days and staying home and public health issue. Now that has become prevalent. Now people understand, okay, you should stay home 2 weeks. They didn't understand that before. So it is that message out. We don't want another crisis before people understand what we're trying to put out there. So internally, it is critical for us. The focus is on the narrative shift done by the workers. So we're promoting more and more the voices of those workers, of those women who are victims of sexual harassment, who are impacted by inequality. So that's still going on through social media advocacy platforms. But internally too, it has been a very difficult situation for younger staff, right, who now find themselves at home. Right? So although we wanted to do more communication outside, we have to reflect back and realize that we need to do communication internally, and we need to go toward the digital transformation that requires upskilling of our own staff to know how to use the communication platform. A lot of time, an example has been people think, okay, how do we engage consumers? How do we engage new members? It is posting, and posting. We want to tell them that's not enough, right? When you post, you need to follow up, right? The engagement is something that's really important. It is not only posting, it is not knowing why they like your page, or what are they saying, or how do you move them to get the resources they need to understand. If it is employers, what are the resources that we have for those employers to understand what they can do to help to have worker-friendly policies or help workers? So there is a lot out there.
Thank you. And Kassandra, I know I think you have a 4 o'clock, so.
No worries. The only thing that I would say is that we have increased our tone about how this didn't actually have to happen, that what we are experiencing is based in intentional policy decisions and the abdication of responsibility by the people that are supposed to care for us. And then we've also been really speaking more clearly around alternatives, like what the world could look like if we didn't have these things. And I think that what you saw in November with voters in Oregon and in 5 states around the country was that voters believed in the alternative that we were pushing, which was we don't actually have to live life this way. We can decriminalize drugs and redistribute funds from law enforcement into treatment. We can deal with marijuana in a different way, and people get to choose. If we give people more options, they will choose different options as long as you lay it out for them. And so I think COVID-19, we was like, we didn't have to end up in this situation. These are policy choices. So let's pick things that actually get to the place that we actually could be.
Thank you. And I know we are out of time. Tina, are there any questions?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Vanessa.
Oh, no. I was going to ask Siby and Kassandra, can you all take one question? Is that okay? Okay. So there's a question for companies that are freaked out by the word and actions associated with activism. How do you suggest bringing senior leaders along in a way that is productive and action-oriented?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Let me find it. For companies that are freaked out by the word and actions associated with activism, how do you suggest bringing senior leaders along in a way that is productive and action-oriented?
We have created a racial equity toolkit that I can share with folks. I think it is important for companies to look at themselves and see if they reflect the diversity that they're talking about, if they reflect the inclusion that they're talking about. I think that's important conversation to have internal to those companies. It is really, I don't think it is to freak out. It is to really looking at themselves in the mirror and understand if they reflect, the diversity, if they have the number of people who can understand the issues at hand so that they can properly address those issues. I think that's the first step that needs to happen. But I can share later on with you the equity, the racial equity toolkit, which is one of the toolkit that companies can use.
Perfect. Thank you. Kassandra, you want to add anything to that?
I think that companies need to not try to be out front. And so I think getting senior leaders to meet with the different groups that are doing the activism and finding out what actually they are comfortable with. I think we really miss a lot when we feel like people have to buy the whole cow. In activism, you can figure out what your lane is and what is important, and pick that thing and do that part. And give your senior leaders the opportunity to grow. So many things are moving so quickly. And I think oftentimes we're looking for our leaders to buy everything wholesale. And I think it's important for us to actually lean into the learning and the practice for these companies to move. It can be frustrating for folks that are further along, but if folks don't have a real intimate learning process, they can revert back very quickly, and that's harmful to our advocacy work. And so what I would suggest, what I am assuming this is about, is words like defund and abolition. And so I think it's important for us to do piecemeal work with our leaders and figure out what is the lane that our companies are okay with, and invest in that and just create a learning opportunity so that we don't have to do things overnight. I think the survey shows that no one's looking for perfection, and perfection is actually the enemy of progress, as we know. And so I think it's picking a lane, figuring out the thing that we want to get really good at, and then go on to other folks. When you go to college, you start off at the 101 level. You don't start off at 501. And I think companies need to do this as well.
Thank you both. This was incredibly valuable and great conversation. I wish we had more time, but I know there is someone up behind us, so I'm going to turn it back over to Tina.
Okay, thank you so much, Vanessa Wakeman, Kassandra, Frederique, and Dr. Sekou, Siby. I'll speak for everyone when I say everyone wants like a round 2 of this panel, so we'll have to think about that, because I was getting messages and everywhere about how fascinating it was, and just thinking about things that maybe people haven't thought about and how corporate can play a role and the actions can be contradictory. So thanks to the 3 of you so much. We really appreciate you being here today. So thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you, Kassandra. Thank you, Siby.